really big stones. The types of stones, just go back to that last back slide, the type of stones that were used in Greater Cherokee were rounded river cobbles. They were probably carried by ranks of people, building large circular foundations. And then on top of this, they would erect a huge superstructure in a conical shape that would be the house that would hold several families together. And at the site of Rivas, we find lots of these. Next slide. Here you can see some of the excavations while they were taking place. Next slide. Here you can see one of these house circles in the background, and here's one in the foreground. These are just some photographs I took during the excavations there, but you get a sense of the ramps and the walls. Next slide. Some careful archaeological excavation taking place to recover sherds and other types of things. Next slide. Next slide. This kind of just gives you a sense. Here's a map of the village of Rivas itself, which is a series of these circular house foundations, and then a large cemetery built up on top of a ridge where large quantities of gold objects were looted by pot hunters in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And unfortunately, what was the principal cemetery of this village has largely been looted out, but that's where we get a lot of the materials that are now in museum collections. Next slide. Here's some other views. This one is a little bit hard to see, but what you're looking at here is another large foundation of one of these large house platforms, which would have had an enormous structure on top of it, maybe stretching 30 meters up in the air, sometimes as far as much as 60 or 70 feet high. Here's some aerial photographs. If you look closely, here's one of the foundations right here. The reason I'm showing you this is to give you a sense that we do know something about these people. We know where their villages were, we know what their houses looked like, we know what their pottery looked like and their stone tools. We can even see them in sculptures. So they're not as mysterious as people might have you believe. Next slide. Some other views, we'll go through these next kind of quickly. Here you can see, if you look closely, some other views of these house foundations. These photographs were actually taken in a very ingenious way with a balloon. You send up above the site, and then you can kind of click and take pictures from the balloon as it hovers up above you. Here you can see some stairs leading up to the structure, and here's the large circuit there. And I'm showing you these just to give you a context, because it's these same types of structures that are found in association with the stone spheres. Next slide. Here's a map of some of the structures at Rivas, and you can see the stone circles here. Here's another one located here. Here are a series that were probably built on top of each other over time. Structures were built and abandoned and rebuilt over time, and you get sort of a layering of these across the surface over time. As I said, most of them were built out of river cobbles that were very abundant in the area, and then had perishable superstructures. Some other views of Rivas. Okay. These are archaeological reconstructions of what these look like. There was a large staircase that went from the village up to the top of the ridge, and then two large cemeteries here, called Panteon Norte and Panteon Sur. When I show you some gold objects, they come from these looted areas. Interestingly, the houses at Rivas were organized in such a way that the doors of the houses all faced up the staircase into the cemetery. So people were actually looking out of their doors at the graves of their ancestors. Really beautiful way to kind of orient this village. They're not looking out on the river. The river view would be that way. They're actually looking up on top of the hill at where ceremonies and where their ancestors were buried. Next slide. And here you can see a view of, this is what the hill looks like. Here's the top of the staircase. And then these are two different burial areas. In fact, there were two sets of houses, some of which faced this one, and some of which faced the other one. Next slide. And here you can see some of the structures that were excavated there. Large rectangular platforms, probably for the preparation of corpses. Among the kinds of things that we think they did was to strip the corpses of flesh before burying the bones themselves in what were known as secondary burials. Next slide. And this is some of the pottery that's associated with the culture of Rivas. Painted vessels, incised vessels, tripod vessels that would be drinking chalices for drinking probably corn beer, and they often had rattles in them. Interestingly, we have a number of these vessels in collections here at KU, where we've had a number of objects given as gifts to the Spooner Hall Archaeological Research Collection from faculty who've traveled in Costa Rica over the years. And so some of you who have seen exhibits here at KU may have seen these vessels themselves. and a selection of the pottery. We actually know quite a bit about what it was they were making, and cooking and preparing and drinking. Next slide. As well as some of their artwork in ceramics, which is approaching ceramic sculpture. Many of times they made small figurines, like these. And then this is just a general view of the Rivas area, looking out on the Terra Bruce Valley. Next slide. They made petroglyphs, some of which are found at the Rivas site. And here's one of my colleagues, Ida Blanco, sitting near one of these petroglyphs. Give you a sense of scale. Next slide. I have a few too many excavations. I was going to cull this presentation a little bit before I came. Some examples of the sculpture that comes from sites like Rivas and elsewhere in the Deep East Delta includes representations of jaguars. Next slide. And pottery painted in red and black colors, very distinctive pottery. As well as this what's called biscuitware, very fine pottery with very smooth surfaces. And incised decorations, next slide, and a wide variety of styles that help us understand the time period. In fact, this pottery here dates to that period I mentioned, 600 to 700 AD. We also have another suite of pottery that dates between 700 and the time of the Spanish conquest. In fact, we divide the culture of Greater Cherokee into two main segments, the earlier known as the Aguas Buenas period, the last known as the Cherokee period. Next slide. It's an example of pottery that comes from the later period. As well as distinctive a different stone sculpture style that grows out of the earlier style, and is also figures who are standing on these peg bases, some of which with grimacing faces, others that are decorated with crocodile figures or other animal representations. Next slide. And in some cases holding trophy heads. In fact, the trophy head tradition continues on into the later period. There are representations of people transforming into animals, and in fact, just as we have werewolves and vampires, people who turn into wolves and bats, in ancient Cherokee, they seem to believe that people could turn into crocodiles and jaguars, and sometimes even bats. In fact, yes, they did have people transforming into bats, batmen, in ancient Cherokee. Next slide. Okay, this brings us back to the Deep Delta. And I wanted to show you all of that other stuff to give you a cultural context within which to place these very, very unusual objects that I'm going to be showing you next. This is the Delta region of where the Deep River empties into the Pacific Ocean. This is an island called Isla Violinas, where Sir Francis Drake visited, and there's presumably pirate treasure to be found there still. It hasn't yet been found. Next slide. But in the 1930s, an American company, United Fruit Company, relocated its operations from the Caribbean side to Costa Rica to southern Costa Rica. And in fact, this became the home of Chiquita Banana. And Rita Moreno and all of the Chiquita lady with her fancy headdress, and all of the information that you would get about not putting bananas in the refrigerator and all those other types of things. A massive promotion of Chiquita bananas took place in the United States during the Second World War, and particularly during the 1950s, when Chiquita bananas were coming out of these plantations. Well, to prepare the banana plantations before the banana trees went in, actually here you can see some of those banana trees, they cleared the landscape. And in clearing the landscape of trees and of tropical forests and massive removal, deforestation of the rainforest, they came across these objects. Great big weird stone balls. Here's one of my students with one of these objects, and they are just as I described them. There's not much fancy stuff to these sculptures, although they are very much sculptures. They're big, round balls.
John, they look almost perfectly spherical.
They do. And in fact, people claim that they are perfectly spherical, but in fact, they're not.
Okay.
Check out this one. It's not perfectly spherical. Some of them have damage. Some of them have erosion. They do have a very smooth surface on top, but they are not perfect. This is something that has been greatly exaggerated, especially by those who want to make you think that these might have come from ancient aliens. And actually, there are all kinds of crazy ideas about these. In fact, I once had somebody send me an email saying, I know what those stone spheres were. They were projectiles fired from the cannons of flying saucers during an intergalactic battle that took place over the Earth. And it, it's an intriguing idea, but what that person was referring to was his understanding of cannonballs.
Can we locate where the stone originated?
Yes, the stone originates in upper reaches of that particular river. And in fact, one of the characteristics of the rivers of this area is that they carry huge volumes of water. And in fact, during the rainy season, boulders will be the size of Volkswagens, will be rolling over each other. It makes a tremendous roar. And actually, this fact that you find big boulders rolling in the rivers gave me the idea that if I were going to make one of these things, I guarantee you I would spend a few days looking for the biggest, roundest, most perfect boulder in the river I could find, and then I would start working into a sphere. And these aren't made out of blocks, square blocks of stone. They don't fit our model of quarrying, as one might think about with Michelangelo. Who was it that played Michelangelo? Was it Charlton Heston? Driving those great big blocks of marble in Italy, or the Egyptians cutting those big blocks of limestone. That's not how this worked. People would find rounded stones and work with those in order to make the spheres. They get to be pretty big. Most of them were polished with a smooth finish. As I said, we know of over 300 of these. Next slide. Here's another view. This one is in a town called Palmar Norte. This was actually hauled out of one of the banana plantations. We actually have seen where this was excavated. Here's my lovely wife, Lauren, who stands about 5'3", standing next to one of the largest of these spheres. They weigh, in some cases, up to 16 tons. This is the largest one. It's known as El Silencio, is the name of the site, which means the silence. And what you see here, you can tell the surface is not in great shape. Among the things that happen with these stones when they're exposed on the surface is that when they light fires to burn away the vegetation at the end of the dry season before they plant, the stones can get very, very hot. And if it happens to rain when the stones are hot, they will spall on their surface. And so agricultural activities have caused the spalling of these surfaces. However, if this sphere were to be taken and turned upside down, the bottom would be totally smooth. And I've been lobbying my friends in Costa Rica and others for years and say, let's just turn the ball upside down, figure out some way to move it, and it'll be very spectacular because the bottom has been perfectly preserved. It's been sitting in this location for a long time. It's a little bit hard to tell the size of this thing from this particular photograph. Here I am visiting it back in 1991. You can see it's a bit cracked around the top, but even back then it was covered by pretty substantial vegetation around it. They've now cleaned off this area. Next slide. Here's how it looks today. This is the largest of the stone spheres. It measures over 2 meters in diameter and weighed more than 16 tons and would have been incredibly difficult to move. Next slide. Here's me posing with it just a couple of years ago. This was in 2010. Next slide. Some of these stones are broken in half. In fact, sadly, one of the local legends is that they have gold inside of them. Nobody can explain how they get gold inside of them. It's sort of an absence of any knowledge of geology or even logical thinking. But there are a number of these that have been dynamited in order to see if there's gold inside. And of course, they break it open and there's no gold inside. And what do you get? A broken sphere. It's totally stupid. People do really stupid things. Next slide. Here's one of these broken spheres sitting on a hilltop, unfortunately. Others are cracking because of weathering, but yet others are still intact. Next slide. Actually, that last one I showed, stands next to one of these house platforms. This one doesn't have the stone around it, but it's close to that. Next slide. Here you can see one with my colleague Richard Cook from Panama that has rolled down into a stream bed. In fact, they're often put along ridge tops, and gravity, of course, carries them down into the streams. Next slide. And here's a group that I was with in 2010. In spring break of 2010, we went down to Costa Rica with an expedition sponsored by UNESCO because we're in the process of trying to create a World Heritage Site based on these large stone spheres, the center of which will be a, yes, ballpark where they are assembling as many of these large spheres as can be assembled in order to create a tourist attraction. But here you see several archaeologists gathered around one of these large stone spheres, which actually now happens to stand up in the courtyard of a high school in Palmar Sur. These are at the National Museum in Costa Rica, where they've collected these. Unfortunately, because the banana company, at the same time that it did the land clearing and found the stones, or found the spheres, was also building railroads. You take big stone sphere, railroad, next thing you know, people are shipping them all over the country. These spheres have been shipped all over Costa Rica, where they have filled pretty much the same role in Costa Rican front yards as pink flamingos have in parts of the United States, or those big mirror balls. They stand in front of office buildings, they stand in people's gardens, and actually some of them have even gone overseas. In fact, Calvin Klein has 2 of them in his garden in England that Costa Ricans are now trying to repatriate because he should not have those. Well, looking at these, you get a sense of what their size is. I think one more slide. I think there's a big round one. Yeah. Well, this is another big round one. And I'm curious whether you guys have any idea about how these were moved. Because I can explain how you would move one of these without even touching it. And when I tell you, you'll shake your head because it'll be so simple. And it actually makes it seem like magic. You can move an enormous ball like this simply by lifting it up a little bit. And then without even touching it, I can move it the length of this room without even touching it. Here's my theory. And again, it's just a theory. I haven't put this into action. I haven't tried it at all. But it's based upon a game that all of you have played at some point. Okay? It's a game that they give us when we're little kids. I'm going to put the microphone down so I can show you. Actually, I don't have it. I don't have a pen or pencil. But just imagine this. Here's the game. You guys, it'll be all right. You all remember this game because everyone has played it at some point. There are 2 long steel rods. Underneath those steel rods are a series of holes. You put a large ball bearing on top of those rods, and by moving the rods apart or together, the ball bearing goes back and forth. And the object of the game is to get the ball bearing to roll along and then drop into one of those holes. Everyone know what I'm talking about?
Sure.
Okay? Do you touch the ball to roll it?
No.
What makes the ball roll?
Gravity.
Gravity. All you have, and the other thing that makes the ball roll is its spherical shape sitting on top of those stainless steel rods. Okay, here's my idea. If you have 2 logs, and you can get one of these balls on the end of those logs, by moving the logs apart or together, you can get that ball to roll back or forth without even touching it. In fact, if you take a series of logs and lay out a pair, and then a pair, and then a pair, and then a pair, just like a railroad track, using that particular principle of gravity and the sphericity of the sphere, you could roll that ball hundreds of meters, miles even, just by getting it to roll. And you wouldn't even have to touch it. It's a very simple technology, but one of my favorite quotes from science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke is, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." If you had not seen that technology before and all you saw was the ball rolling all by itself, you'd say, "No, that's magic." This is one of the techniques that I think, ingenious techniques that I think may have been used to move those. I should mention there's a similar technique, and if I had time I would show you a little video I like to show my students. On Easter Island, they have a tradition that the statues walked to their positions. And you know what we think that comes from now? Have you ever had a big dresser or a great big box that you were able to move across a room by walking it back and forth? Well, archaeologists have recreated one of these large stone statues on Easter Island by tying ropes to the top and lifting it and balancing it. You can walk it back and forth. And twisting it a little bit at a time, you can actually walk it down a road. So the statues did walk. They had a little bit of help, And the balls did roll, and you didn't have to touch them.
These folks have iron tools to,
They had no metal tools other than, well, they only had no metals other than copper and gold.
what did they use to, what do you think they used to do that?
To make
To make the balls?
to make the balls themselves were stone on stone, bashing stone and shaping it. And I have an idea about how these were shaped, okay? And this came to me from, and actually I'm going to reveal to all of you a trade secret that I was sworn not to reveal. But I'm only revealing it to people who I am certain are not going to go take it and then start your own business. Next slide. Actually, I'm going to go a couple slides ahead. Measuring the balls. Here's a guy who makes the balls himself. You asked how they were made. What he does is he makes handles and then uses basically stripped down inner tubes, heavy rubber inner tubes, to tie cobbles to the ends of handles, and he just bashes it. This is a ball that he made simply by hammering on a large boulder. Okay, the surface crushes enough that you can crush it and blow it off, and then crush it again, and it takes him about a week to make one of these stone balls. Okay, so the technology is not a difficult one. How do you get it round? That's where the trade secret comes in. Next slide. I learned this from someone who owns a company that's called Water Fountains. Waterfountains.com is actually his website. You may have seen some of his work if you've been to the Omaha Zoo, where there's a large stone sphere that sits on top of a layer of water that you can turn and spin with your hand. There's another one at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. They're all around the United States. But essentially, by setting a large, perfectly polished ball into a similar socket and providing water, it'll actually lift up the ball, and you can actually rotate the ball. But he makes enormous stone spheres. Actually, he doesn't make them. They're made in, anyone want to guess where they know how to make this kind of stuff? China. That's exactly right. The Chinese have a factory where they can fabricate stone spheres out of anything. They make crystal quartz spheres. They make lapis lazuli spheres. They make granite spheres. Well, how does he get the spheres so perfectly round? Well, it's so simple that he assured me it was a trade secret, but I'm going to reveal it. Next slide. All you need to make a perfect sphere is a perfect circle. And the way that he measures the perfect sphericity of his balls is by taking a stainless steel circle and placing it on the surface of the sphere. If you think about simple geometry, any section of a perfect sphere is a perfect circle. It's called a chord. And simply by measuring whether you have that chord and have any distance underneath it, you can tell whether your sphere is perfectly round or not. And I was thinking about this, well, what was the ancient technology that would have been used to measure sphericity? Where do you get a perfect circle to measure things if you don't have any stainless steel forms? Anyone